Hello, and welcome everyone to the Hustle Code. The Hustle Code is a series of curated talks with some of the most persistent founders and investors in the startup ecosystem. Here we try to decode the what, why, and how of their journeys. Through these stories, we wish to embrace the spirit of hustle. So brace yourselves for a gripping and an insightful dialogue. Welcome everyone. I'm Tushar, your host for today. Today we have a special guest, Chinmoy Mishra at the Hustle Code. Chinmoy is a serial entrepreneur who has had a successful exit from his previous venture, HooLivs, and now is running HooLiv, a student shared living venture. So without further ado, let's jump into our conversation. Chinmoy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tushar, and a pleasure to have a chat with you anytime. Thank you so much.
Same here, Chinmoy. So to begin with, Chinmoy, let's go a little bit back in time. Can you take us through when was it when you decided to become an entrepreneur?
It's been a long time, Tushar. I think it was during the time when I was in the US. I was working with Infosys for a large insurance client, being there in the US for about 5 years or so. And what I started realizing increasingly, Tushar, is that I was getting increasingly mediocre, you could say. There was a sense of complacency, and you don't know where your work is going in the overall scheme of things. And you kind of get into a very shell, you're very happy with the monthly paychecks, and that becomes almost like an inhibitor in learning further. So I don't know how I came to that realization. Maybe it could be that, I saw a few of my friends or seniors taking the leap of faith. So it kind of struck me that, hey, look, maybe I'm getting into that rut as well, and I need to do something about it. And being in the health tech space for a long time by then, Tushar, I thought maybe I could look at going back to India and starting something on these lines. So that's the time during 2005-06 is when I actually seriously started thinking about starting my own venture and moving out of a 9-to-5 job. It had almost become a treadmill of existence, you could say. So yeah, that's where the bug hit me to move out and do something on my own.
So I'm guessing you studied at Babson before that,
right?
Or after that?
No, after that. So in 2002, I moved to the US. Until 6, I was with Infosys for that healthcare client. And 6 to 8 is when I went to Babson. So when I finally decided to move out and start my own venture, I kind of scouted for schools which are good in entrepreneurship, have a strong entrepreneurial focus. And that's how Babson came quite higher up in the list. So I applied to a few different schools and was lucky enough to get into Babson. So that happened from 6 to 8. And then again, after I graduated, I realized that there is a lot more to the startup side of things than just what we read in the books. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So I decided to work for another small venture, which was based out of Bangalore. So they were primarily into healthcare IT services again. But when I joined, we decided to start a product division. And the primary market was again the North Americas and the Europe and stuff. So I was the head of sales for about 4 years or so, you could say, from 2008 till 2012. I got to know a lot of nuances of the startup world, how it does, how we think about it. And that kind of complemented what I had learned at Babson very well with my actual, practical knowledge. So in 2012 is when I moved out and started HooLivs, the first venture.
So Chinmoy, what would we say? Was Babson experience, let's say, instrumental in your journey to be an entrepreneur?
Oh, absolutely, Tushar. I mean, I think the role that Babson has played, in the modicum of success I have had, wherever I am today, I think Babson has a great role to play in that. What I always maintain, Tushar, is that, you can always look at an MBA from two aspects. One is learning the hard skills, and the other one is honing on your softer skills. So if it comes to pure hard skills, I don't think, and I agree with a lot of people and a lot of social media chatter, that an MBA is not required. I firmly believe that even a local Kirana store guy knows much more about finances and hard skills than we might, even after an MBA. But where Babson really helped me, Tushar, was in the soft skill side of things, With its focus on diversity and having people from across the globe, it suddenly exposes you to a whole new world. It kind of makes you believe that if there is a good idea, then the borders are just, mere boundaries that you can easily overcome. So when you stay, we're literally in the 2 years, you're living with people from Peru, from Germany, from Japan, you're learning their culture, you're visiting their homes, you're staying with them. The perspective that you gain, that kind of makes you a world citizen. And that's where, Tushar, I think one of the things we lack, when you talk about the Facebooks or the Googles or the Apple, I don't think they started off saying, oh, we're just going to solve a problem in California or maybe in Boston and then think about moving out. They always thought about a global product. And that is where I think we are a bit handicapped in the way we think when it comes across products, is that let me solve a local problem first, then solve it in India, then think about outside. Why? I've always maintained that if it's a great product, the boundaries are just mere connotations. It can easily fall. So I think those softer skills, Tushar, the appreciation of different cultures, contexts, and thinking in a global scale, that is something that Babson drilled very well. And also the another beautiful thing that I always learned, Tushar, at that point in time, it was tough to relate. But later on, kind of realized is Babson always is kind of drills into you a concept of situational leadership, that no one person can be good at everything, and that you need to trust your team and delegate it to them certain aspects where you believe that they might be better than you are. And that is something very tough to relate at that point in time. But once you are into an entrepreneurial journey, you come across that point that, hey, look, I may not be good in the marketing part, let my team handle that. Or I may not be good in technology, let somebody else handle that. And then at certain point in time, entrust them with taking that decision. So those kind of things, Babson imbibed very well, the focus on humility, appreciation for all entrepreneurs who have gone on to do beautiful things. We might be critical of a lot of people. We might be critical of the ventures, but we are never critical of the entrepreneurs themselves, because we all know, Tushar, that entrepreneurs never fail, right? Companies may or may not, right? So I think these are the things, Tushar, I believe that I may have missed out if I had not gone to Babson.
Now, that's great experience, Chinmoy. So you mentioned that you started Allizhealth in 2012, right? I mean, there must have been a lot of thoughts gone behind starting something in healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just take us through what was the thought process behind starting Allizhealth?
Sure. When I had actually, moved to join Babson, I was coming in from a very health insurance background. So my initial thought about was to come back to India and start something on the line of a third-party administrator and get into real-time claims analysis or claims adjudication, very, very deep into the health insurance space. But by the time, I entered Babson and then had the experience with the other company, I think the idea had shaped up a lot more. So once I came back to India, I realized that when it came to health tech and some of the ideas which were starting to gain traction in the US, especially in terms of preventative care, in terms of health and wellness, corporate wellness, in terms of predictive data analytics. So those were concepts which were starting to gain a foothold in the US, but in Indian market, they were still quite alien. Not many people were open to that. And also some of the large enterprises, the insurance companies, they were working in a predominantly very traditional mode. And if you look at that time frame also, Tushar, 2012, 13, that's when we were almost at the cusp of something big happening in the Indian startup ecosystem. A lot of good players, the Flipkarts and all of the world were coming out. So there was a lot of buzz around that. So we felt that, with my healthcare experience and some of the knowledge that we had gained from the US market, the European market, we could easily apply it to the Indian context as well. And that is something that there was a gap that we saw, an opportunity definitely. And also, Tushar, as I've said, many different platforms, that I didn't know anything else. I was so deep into the health tech space by then that I was very myopic and I didn't know anything else. So yeah, it came as a very natural choice for us.
So Chinmoy, beyond, just the glamour of starting your own venture, right, which drives a lot of us to, start our journey as an entrepreneur, I'm sure there must have been certain challenges which you faced while building Allizhealth, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So can you just take us through what are the top challenges you felt while building Allizhealth?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so Tushar, I think the biggest challenge is crossing the starting line. You may or may not reach the finish line. That's a whole different thing. But crossing the starting line is the toughest. It's a huge, immense leap of faith. And when you're used to a certain lifestyle with a monthly paycheck, to kind of forego all that and jump into this entrepreneurship world, it looks very glamorous from outside. But yeah, you need to break a lot of eggs to make that omelet. So it was a huge leap of faith. But once you are into it, I think you are also carried, through your own passion and discipline that carries you through. But then what happens, Tushar, is once you start hitting some of those key milestones with regards to getting your first employee on board or getting your first customers on board, and that's where the real fun starts. How do you manage the salaries of your employees, every month to month? And since we were in a product and a B2B space where a lot of things were deliverable based, so you didn't have a very clear idea on the monthly cash flows, right? So if your deliverables are delayed, you don't know how to fund the next month's salaries. So those are the challenges that start coming in, from your own people perspective. How do you hire the right talent? So here again, when we started off, Tushar, one of the mistakes I think I did was that we looked at pedigrees of people and getting, people from certain type of institutes and stuff, rather than looking at people that we could work with or the ones that were willing to work in a startup environment without much frills. So I think we did some of those mistakes early on. So we had to get into a bit of an hiring and firing mode when we realized it wasn't working out. So from how you run into hiring challenges, you run into challenges where people have all sorts of complaints. They want certain things which, with the limited funds, you are unable to provide it to them. So on that one part, Tushar, you have to deal with such struggles. The other one is once you start onboarding your customers, then you need to be responsive to them. You need to kind of tackle them. That comes in. And then the nail is when you take on investors, right? So there is always the yin and the yang when it comes to the investors. There are few that always will be a pain. And, so you need to deal deftly with them also. So you start taking on these kind of challenges. And then when you take it a step up and look at it from an overall company perspective, then you need to work on how do I scale my venture? How do I grow from here? Where do I go? What is the competition doing? How do I tackle them? So the list becomes endless from then moment you jump into it. We did a lot of mistakes in a lot of spaces, right from, as I said, not hiring the right people. And again, on those lines, and when I look back, to share another mistake we did was we stuck with some mediocre people for way more than we should have. We were very emotional about people that we hired. And we were always like, oh, okay, this guy is from a slightly bottom of the pyramid. His family depends on him, on her. So we should not be just asking that person to leave. Let's persist with that person for some more time. And in the end, what happened is when you persist with people who are not as productive as you want to be or not as good, your quality suffers, your service suffers and all. So I think we erred there as well. We didn't ask people to go where we should have. We did a lot of mistakes when it came to basic hygiene of maintaining our books in order, maintaining our agreements in a proper way. So there were a lot of those things. We maybe, because of a lack of faith rather, we always had great mentors in form of some of our key investors. But I think we lacked that conviction to get somebody as a mentor. And maybe we had that chip on our shoulder that, hey, look, we know better than everyone. So what that resulted in, Tushar, is that maybe some of our negotiations with our customers could have been better. We might have left a lot of money on the table. And in hindsight, we feel that maybe a good mentor or an advisor could have helped us through that. So each and every aspect that we did, Tushar, of the entire venture, there were some good things that we did, knowingly or unknowingly. And there were certain not so good things too.
Got it. So Chinmoy, there's a lot of talk also amongst the founders about, setting up the culture of the firm.
Mm-hmm.
When you were building HooLivs and when you were learning about how to build a quality team, right? Mm-hmm. Did it occur to you that you should be setting up a certain culture for the firm?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, Tushar. And I think there are two parts to it, right? There are some of the things that almost happen without you really trying to enforce it. I mean, what we have realized in my previous venture and also current venture is that the way that you are, the kind of person that you are, you always end up attracting talent around you who are exhibit a similar kind of trait. Maybe it is good, maybe it is bad. Sometimes you might have people who are contrasting traits just to challenge you and keep you on toes. But that's just the normal, course of the nature's law. You could say that we tend to attract people of a similar kind of background. So if me and my founders, we kind of believe in being down to earth and humble, we will always attract those kind of talents who show that level of humility. So that almost automatically sets your culture, in a way. The other one definitely, Tushar, is something that we consciously try to bring about with regards to one that I mentioned, not get into a hiring and firing culture. If we do the same as founders, the people that we hire will do the same to the people they hire in turn, right? And not always take one person's word as the gospel, but always hear both sides of the stories. So, when it came to your own colleagues, then when it came to your customers, how do you deal with them? We had this one rule, Tushar, in that we tried to follow as much as possible, is that whenever we received an email from, say, an irate customer, the approach was not to reply to that email within the first 30 minutes, because we realized the moment you do that, you are replying in anger, and that just escalates the matters, right? So we pushed back and we said, let's hold on for 30 minutes. So again, this is something like you push. And then in the end of the day, Tushar, the employees that we have, the colleagues that we work with, those are the biggest assets, right? So we take care of them with, you have some fun activities going on, you engage them, you incentivize them if they come up with some great ideas, right? And not just make them people you have been hired to work. So again, I always say, Tushar, is that, we always want people to be imaginative in the work that they have been assigned, not work like robots, right? The trouble happens, Tushar, is when people imagine the kind of work they have been given rather than being imaginative in the work they have been assigned. That's where the trouble starts. But I think the culture always for me, Tushar, has to be built from inside out and not from outside in. You cannot look at few other companies and say, that's the kind of company I want to be, because the contexts are so different, the kind of people that you work with are so different, that it has to be built from inside out. So that's how we went about it, Tushar.
So, is there some playbook that you created around what kind of people you want to hire and what kind of people are more suitable for a venture like yours?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, Tushar, when we started off with, definitely, since we are a very deep tech company, data analytics and stuff, we definitely preferred people who are from some of the premier institutes. And similarly, when it came to selling to the, we were pretty much selling to the CXO level. So we were looking at people with, MBA degrees from good institutes and stuff. But later point in time, we started realizing, Tushar, that may not be, an entirely right way of going about it. We may be, so this slightly kind of started moving away and looking at people who were interested in a startup workplace, in a culture, and not just joining because, it looks great when you are with few friends over drinks to say that I am in a startup. We didn't want people with that kind of attitude, but people who are genuinely interested in learning and building something out. So the moment you start focusing on that, Tushar, and keep hiring people for the right reasons, the institute or the college that they belong to no longer matters. You find great people in absolutely every corner of the country. So that is one definite move that we did, is that not focus anymore on getting some from the top institutes, but people who have the right mindset. That's one we did. The other one, on slightly on a funnier side, Tushar, what we realized is when you hire people with slightly lower GPAs, you know that any work you have assigned to them, their attitude will be, how can I finish it in the quickest time and leave? And they would be the smartest at work. They would put in their best during that 7 to 8 hours and do it to the best ability, just that so they can go out. Whereas when you look at some of these higher GPA kids that we used to hire from the institutes, they're just logging it out 25 hours a day. And, so we used to definitely, kind of slightly be more biased towards people who had a slightly lower GPA on their CVs. But that's more on the, this fun side. Yeah. So we started looking at that, Tushar. And also another thing we realized, Tushar, is that, when you look at people who slightly desperate for a job and you take them in and you groom them and you are kind of supporting them both professionally and personally, they tend to be much more loyal to you. Some of the kids that we had hired way back in 2013, they're still around. They're still around after the acquisition. They're there and they've grown enormously. So it's very heartwarming when you see them, someone who started with, say, a 7 to 8K in month, in hand, now getting almost 70, 80K in hand. So it gives you a great feeling that you managed to shape their lives in some way, even in a small way. So these were the factors that we started bringing in, Tushar, when we looked at hiring people.
Yeah, Chinmoy. So moving on a little bit, trying to understand what was the whole experience like building a B2B health tech venture, right? We have not seen many unicorns coming out of the health tech space, but we all know that the problem in India is massive, right? Regarding healthcare.
Yeah.
So what does it take to build a health tech venture?
Yeah. I think, Tushar, one thing is very clear, that if anyone wants to make a quick buck, then healthcare startup is not the place. Because if you go around the healthcare startup community, one of the common things you would find, Tushar, in almost all of us, is that we got into the health tech space because we found that there was a big challenge. And there was something that happened either in our personal lives, which affected us adversely to a great deal. So we always get into an healthcare startup phase with a slightly, you could say, utilitarian kind of mindset that, hey, look, I'm going to eradicate diabetes from the world. I'm going to diagnose breast cancer for everyone before it happens. So it's a very big goal. And that's what the challenge we run into. Once we start with the big picture, right, of where we want to be, we lose sight of things that can maybe turn that idea into a profitable venture. There's two very different things, right? You would know much better that having a great product and building a company are very different things. So if you look at one of the two common things you would hear, Tushar, in the healthcare ecosystem is, one, that it is, kind of very crowded market that you will always hear. And second, you will always hear that, hey, look, it's, a lot of services are commoditized. Now, if you look at the first part of it, the perception that it's a crowded market, it actually happens because when we start with the healthcare venture, when we realize that there are so many gaps, we kind of subconsciously, we try to address all of those gaps. And at the end of the day, what happens is we try to be everything to everyone and end up being nothing to, anyone. We lose that focus. And that's where you see some of the brilliant healthcare companies from India, groups like Nirmay, and you have Forest Health, iCure, a great friend of mine runs iCure. Those are brilliant ventures because they're focused on only one thing and they're doing it better than everyone else. But when we started, we're saying, okay, we are going to do data analytics and we are going to figure out if someone is going to be diabetic. Then if you figured out someone is going to be diabetic, we are going to deliver medicine to that person's doorstep. Now, when we have delivered medicine, we are going to prompt that person to go for a health checkup periodically. And then we are going to suggest which lab he or she should go to. Then we should be building a network of labs. So you see where we are heading with this. We're trying to be almost everything in the value chain. So that's where the problem comes in, is that then we become such generalists that we're trying to fight it out with everyone. And there is a big reason also behind that, Tushar, is because in healthcare, unlike other spaces, the gestation periods are so long that moment you take on investors, then it becomes a rush towards justifying the returns to them. So you need to monetize everything that you're doing. But if I'm in a preventive care or a wellness where the results take 2 to 3 years to show, how do I justify that thing, right? And that's when I look at for some of these small low-hanging fruits that, hey, look, if I'm sending someone for a health checkup, I'm getting some money out of it, right? And we start getting into all these detours. And at the end of the day, we have lost track. And that's how we become very commoditized, right? And a very crowded place. So that's the biggest challenge, Tushar, is that some of these brilliant companies, they have stayed true to their course and they said, we are this is what we are going to be. Everything else, either we are going to partner with somebody in the ecosystem or, we are not going to touch it, but we are not going to do it ourselves. So that's the bigger this thing. The other challenge also is that we somehow, in the Indian healthcare space, we have lost sight of what truly qualifies as a health tech venture. There are certain, say, e-pharmacy companies, or you have people who, companies where you can look for doctors. Now, I do not have any problems with them. They are brilliant companies, but the classification of them into health tech is problematic, because unless you consider the use of internet or a mobile app as technology, there is very little technology to do with what they're doing. They're pretty much yellow pages. But the moment they classify themselves as health tech, they're drawing out a lot of VC funds and funds towards them because of their pedigrees and achievements. And some of the genuine health tech innovations, which kind of cater to the rural population, for instance, or which kind of cater to the masses, that money goes out of their share, you could say, in a way, because it's always a zero-sum game, right? The amount of funds you have. So I think this classification also needs to be set right, Tushar, that let's call whoever he or she is. There is no shame. If you are building another Just Dial, that's brilliant, but it's not a health tech company.
Got it, Chinmoy. I think two great insights over there. One is, you have to understand that health tech has longer gestation periods, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you have to go beyond than just creating an app or a portal, right? And you have to be very specific in the problem you're solving.
Absolutely.
Oh, great, Chinmoy. So, Chinmoy, tell me something more. As in, it was 2018 when you got acquired, right?
Yes.
When did it occur to you, as an entrepreneur, you must be very deeply involved with HooLivs, right? And you would have wanted your baby to really grow big.
Absolutely.
But when did it occur to you that it's a time to, let's say, merge with a larger player?
Mm-hmm.
And how was that whole journey like for you?
We didn't, to be honest, we didn't plan for it, Tushar. When we had initially approached that group, it was with an aim of securing a Series A round. So the initial discussions were around that. And I think it was towards the early 2018 is when they came back to us and said, hey, look, we have an interest in the health tech space as well and want to grow it. And we have an insurance broking license in India and also in Southeast Asia, where health is a big focus of what their broking arm is also doing. So why don't we acquire you guys and, more like an acqui-hire rather than coming in as investors? So the deal they made, Tushar, was fairly good. It was a pretty decent exit for our investors and also for the promoters. The consideration we had to arrive at that decision whether to sell or not to sell, I think that was guided by some of the things that were happening on our personal lives to all the founders, and also from a professional angle. So if I keep the personal aspect separate, I think the professionally what guided us, Tushar, is definitely when we spoke with this group, the more we interacted with them, we felt that this is a group that they can take our baby, as you said, to a different level. We were still struggling out, fighting it out in the Indian market, and suddenly we have this company which can take us big in Southeast Asia to multiple geographies. And that's what is happening, to be honest at this point. So that guided us that look, we can go to reach to the next level. And even today, even having sold Tushar, when we read about, some insurance company in Philippines with the press release saying, or we have taken up a wellness platform from this venture, and it gives you a great pride, like, hey, this is my company. So I think we had a good exit for investors. We had good comfort with the team. We felt that this is the right thing to do professionally at a stage where we were. So that helped us with the decision making. But then what happened again, Tushar, is once post-acquisition, it wasn't as rosy as people from outside think it is. And acquisition is always tough. And even before the acquisition, one of my friends said, very nicely told me about something that Ronnie Screwvala had mentioned, is that, you can never work for a company that you have built. And at that point in time, it was tough to see the truth in that. But post-acquisition, I think we ran into that. And I was the first one, in fact, to run into that trouble. And it had to stem from my own biases and my own, you could say, ego rather than anything else. So when you have been running your venture, your baby, you feel that you are the one who know most about it. So post-acquisition, when people used to come and say, hey, Chinmoy, we need to do this or do that, the first reaction is very defensive. You're like, no. How can someone else tell me what to do? So I think that's always that struggle that creeps in. And so I was the first to move out, maybe 3-4 months post-acquisition. I was like, so I reached out to the Singapore group and they said, guys, I need to move out. And I think given their experience of having acquired a lot of companies, they knew that this is going to happen. But they were very nice enough to, kind of request me to stay till the end of a year, help them with more transition, help them with certain sales, since they were setting up the new sales team and all that. And so they were nice enough, and I reciprocated that. But it gets really tough, Tushar, post-acquisition. And whoever is thinking about acquisition, my 2 cents would be look for an exit the moment you are acquired. That's the best way to go about it. Don't hang around.
Got it, Chinmoy. So moving on from your first venture to the next one, right? From a product play to, let's say, an operations heavy venture, right?
Yes.
I mean, you are making reverse move. Typically, people would prefer to stay in products. So what was the thought process? Why did you choose to work in co-living? Why did you choose to start HooLiv?
Yeah. I think a few different factors, Tushar. One is because of the acquisition anyway, we can't work in the health tech space for a certain period of time. So the health tech was ruled out. And as I said, I didn't know anything. All my 20 years of my career, I have been in health. So when moment health tech was ruled out, areas of fintech, edtech, agri-tech, we did consider all that. Maybe I wasn't as passionate about those fields as I was towards health. And at the same time, all 4 of us, we have been in the technology space for such a long time, in the product space, having built HooLivs, having worked with a lot of MNCs and stuff, that you could say we were a bit bored with technology. We wanted to move out and do something else. And I think during one of our visits to the Paytm office here, we saw a very nice thing on the wall which said, go big or go home. I think it's Vijay Shekhar's favorite quote. And that kind of struck a chord with us. We said, hey, let's look at something building way, way much bigger. Yes, it's tougher, much tougher than, it won't really be right to say tougher, Tushar, because I think both of the spaces have their own challenges. So when we started off, once we all exited Allizhealth, when we're kind of, ideating and what to do next, one of the things that we actually wanted to start out with was like a daycare center for the elderlies. We were very fascinated with that. We realized that in India, if you look at it, either you have some of the poorly run nursing homes where you would never send our parents or grandparents, or you have on the other side some high-end, things like Ambi Valley and stuff, where people generally buy a few crore property or an asset for their parents, and then that's about it. But there was nothing in between. So we initially toggled with the thought of having a daycare center where parents can come in the morning, they can engage during the day in some activity which they were maybe before their retirement or their hobbies, and then end of the day we drop them back. So that's the thought we started out with. But then we realized that maybe we're a bit early for an Indian market for that. So we parked that idea for the moment. It's not out yet. It's still parked. Maybe we'll bring it out at some point. And the next logical thing for us was then to think about the executives and the student housing. And the student housing kind of, you could say we were more enamored by that because we realized having through the hostel life and all ourselves, we realized that that's a big area in India. It's a very untapped market. Specifically, if you look at some of the geographies that we are operating in, the non-metros, the conditions of the properties are very pitiable. So there is an opportunity to not just earn money but we make a difference to the way the students live. Because what we are always, in HooLiv, one of the things we are trying to follow, Tushar, is students don't need a good accommodation; they deserve it, and that's how we are guided here. So yeah, you could say there was a multiple factors coming together. We wanted to get ourselves dirty in the hospitality real estate space and see where it goes. If nothing else, Tushar, one of the two things rather that we have is the confidence that we can take something again from a scratch to $1 million company, and also the all the learnings from the mistakes that we did in the previous venture. So I think we are potentially, when you're armed with these two insights, you are starting at a much different level, irrespective of which space you are in.
No, sure, Chinmoy. I think the problem of student housing, I think everyone agrees with. That's a massive problem. But considering the space is not a blue ocean as such, right?
Yep.
Didn't you initially feel ki it would be tougher to, raise funds? We are not coming from this domain. It would be tougher to build something in real estate.
Yeah.
I mean, people really get scared when they listen real estate, right? So, I mean, what were the thoughts there?
It is. We were never too worried, Tushar, about the initial fundraise, the seed round or the initial raise. And that's what had happened. We never had to struggle for the initial raise. We simply because we knew that any investor, if he or she is going to do a background check, a due diligence, they're only going to hear about our exit and some of our good karma that we have built with the investors. So that was one factor that we were never worried about in the initial stages. The second thing, as you rightly said, we realized that this is a space where we need two things. One is we need access to capital because we knew it's going to be a capex intensive business. And the second thing, also the knowledge of the nuances of real estate space that was very alien to us. And with that thought, the initial wave that we looked at investors was not some of the institutional guys, but we started looking at more from strategic partners or large developer groups who had a lot of assets lying around and who could not only help us with the capital, but also the asset acquisitions and stuff. We started hitting out some of the larger real estate groups. And I think we must have met the counterparty developers towards December of 2019. And by Feb, we had the money in our account. That's how quick it was. They, in fact, checked back with some of our investors like Dr. Malpani and all. And I'm pretty sure they heard some good things. So that helped us in closing that. So we were very confident of the initial part, Tushar. And then on an ongoing method, like as you rightly said, this is a capex intensive business, but it is not a business that you need to run after the investors all the time in order to fund that capex. If I'm taking up a project, if I'm taking up a property and I'm ensuring the profitability at that property level, I can scale very easily. And at the same time, at a group level, I'm not under that immense strain all the time. It is only when people look at the reason, Tushar, people think of real estate as a capex intensive is because our thoughts are still stuck from a developer's mindset, that, someone is constructing a residential park. There must be a lot of money involved in that. Someone is creating a commercial building. There's a lot of investment going in there, right? But it's not so much the case with people like us who are operating and managing assets, or even people who are into the prop tech, real estate tech space. For us, every project is not a huge investment, but if we can turn that profitable, we don't need to keep on borrowing to grow. That is one part, Tushar. But yes, the perception, I think, is changing. As you can see, there are a lot of accelerators who are coming out focused on the real estate side, on prop tech, on real estate tech, on student housing. There is a lot of investor interest, a lot of money pouring in it. And at the end of the day, also, Tushar, a business like us, like ours, or maybe in executive housing and all, we are very typical private equity plays. You're building up these assets, these operating contracts and all, which are 15, 20 years leases. So it's a very, very typical playbook of a private equity. So we're not too worried about whether we should be able to continuously keep on raising funds, because we know that at a certain stage and scale, we would be of great interest to the private equity players and would have skipped the entire venture funding rounds. So those are some of the things. And yeah, lastly, Tushar, it is the way it is. I mean, we have a lot of people who are willing to go on and fund the losses of startups and unicorns. But moment it talk about real estate, we talk about capex. I mean, what can be more capex intensive than funding the losses?
We will talk about that. So, I mean, just last question on HooLiv, as in when you raised funds in February, right? Mm-hmm. In March, COVID hit. I'm sure that would have been a big disruption for your business, right? So What was this whole period like for you, and how are you doing today?
Yeah, no, it was Tushar, and more than anything else, we were looking to get started. We were very eager to get started. We had our first two properties, which we were supposed to go live on 1st of April. So it was very unfortunate. We had to push, the go live to almost August or September. But the couple of good things that happened for us, Tushar, is one is, the entire lockdown, it acted as a great leveler for the co-living industry. So some of the early leaders in this space, couple of them had to actually shut shop because they couldn't meet the commitments. They couldn't, the term sheets that they had was withdrawn. So they had to shut shop. So you could say, some of the early leaders fell off the radar and they shut shop. The other thing also what happened, Tushar, is during the lockdown, as I said, we had only a couple of properties and we delayed the payment of rentals to almost August or September. So we had no operating expense going out when it came to the properties. And even in our team, we had a smaller team, about 7 people going into the lockdown. So we obviously reduced the salaries and kept that OPEX to a minimum. So when we came out of the lockdown, we were, you could say, much better financially. We had that cushion much better than some of our other competitors. So apart from the competitors shutting shop, you had a lot of mom and pop operators who started approaching us and saying, can you take up our lease obligations? We are no longer able to meet it. So then what happened, Tushar, is from about September, October, when my colleagues would actually go out to Feb, we have grown almost exponentially. From about 500 beds, we are now touching almost 3,500 beds across 4 cities, right? Clocking almost, I think this month, more than 50 lakhs in monthly revenues and stuff. So a lot of these things helped us scale much more rapidly simply because we came out of it in a much better way. But yes, some of the things like we cannot have triple sharing room anymore. We had to convert everything into twin sharing. So maybe that reduced the potential top line that we were looking at based on our estimates, our projections. You had to spend on ensuring the COVID protocols. So you spend about 80 to 90 rupees per bed per month just to ensure that every student has a mask, sanitizers in the room, no crowding in the public areas and stuff. So you do all those kind of things. The silver lining though, Tushar, is that given our recent rise in occupancies across properties, we believe that the student housing space is actually bouncing back much faster than maybe the executive housing. Students, given a moment that the college open, the first opportunity, they come back to hostels. None of us want to stay at home at that age. So I think a lot of occupancies are, we're able to drive that. So yeah, it was a hit. And while, in all public forums, we say that it's unfortunate that our competitors had to shut shop, we know in the heart of hearts that is a good thing that happened. So that's...
So, Chinmoy, moving on to some softer aspects of entrepreneurship, which are, let's say, less talked about, right?
Yeah.
How would you rate the importance of having a support system around an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
And does it make sense for an entrepreneur to actively scout for mentors who could help them initially in their journey?
Yes to both, Tushar. Yes to both. I think a support system is incredibly useful. I think the utility of that can never be undermined. We all are where we are simply because we had a phenomenal, support system. Personally, my family, I don't think anyone in my family had been into a startup or a business before. And so when I got into it, I remember, Tushar, for a long time when I used to have the conversation with my dad, every conversation would end with something like, oh, it's great that you are doing something on your own, but you shouldn't have quit your job. I think that was very, very strong for a long period. But yes, none of them ever discouraged me. Rather, they were always very encouraging that if you have taken this step, we would like you to go as far as possible. And whether, and always I had that option of falling back, whether for emotional support or for financially if I wanted something. What also helped matters, for me, Tushar, is my wife also being from Babson. I think, she also been through that entrepreneurial drill. So, it came very naturally for her to support me in my entrepreneurship quest. And I've also always said, Tushar, again, in multiple forums that, we entrepreneurs are glamorized unnecessarily. We are always said that we take big risks and big sacrifices. I don't think that's true. I think the biggest sacrifices are done by your family members. They put aside their dreams to see you fulfill yours. And that's incredible. So yes, support system is very, very required. If nothing else, just for that emotional support, because this journey could be so lonely, Tushar, at times. I remember, I think it was about 2016, 2017, maybe that time frame, when I started seeing my sister was also, Dr. Rashmi was also a partner, and my wife, they started suddenly being very nice to me. They're always nice, but in a very different way. Very supportive in everything I said. There was no conflicts. I was like, everything's right with my wife. Why is there no conflicts? And gradually I started realizing, Tushar, is that even without me knowing, maybe based on my responses, the way I interacted with people, I was getting into slightly, you could say, maybe a depression, very early stage of depression. And that is something that maybe my sister realized, being part of all communications in a professional setting. And she and my wife had spoken about it, and that's how they tried to bring me back. So that's how dangerous it could be, that without even you knowing, you slip into that. So having that support system to pull you back is incredible. And mentors and advisors, yes, absolutely. As I said, Tushar, one of the things that we're trying to consciously do this time in the real estate side is get good people, speak to them, pick their brains in everything that we're trying to do, simply because we didn't trust enough in our previous venture. And we had people like Dr. Malpani, we had people like Sachin Tagra, and all wonderful people. We should have trusted them more, their wisdom, and it might have worked out much better, right? But for every young entrepreneur, Tushar, I would say these two things are incredibly important.
I somewhere read that you say that make ambiguity your best friend.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, that's my favorite line, Bashar, and that is something that one of our professors, Professor Alan Cohen, told us the very first day at Babson. And obviously at that point in time, it was completely lost on us. What exactly did it mean? So being 8-9 years in this journey, Tushar, what I've realized is one of the last things you want to fight in your startup journey is ambiguity, because there is simply no way you can do that. While we might have all our short-term, long-term plans on our spreadsheets and work out all beautiful cash flow projections, but you don't know what is going to hit you maybe in the next hour, in the next day, in the next couple of days. And you're always required to deal with it and keep all your spreadsheets aside. That becomes the one thing that you have to deal, and you are firefighting every hour of the day. So, there is no point in kind of predicting what things are going to be. The only right predictions is that it is going to be ambiguous, right? And that's where at certain point in time you start realizing that, hey, look, let me make friends with it, let me not fight it, but let me deal with every uncertainty as it comes, because end of the day it's making me a better person. I'm being better at making decisions. I am better at handling my customers, my investors, my team. And these ambiguities, when they're thrown at me, it helps me stay nimble. So that's where I always mention, Tushar, is that ambiguity has to be made your friend and not your foe.
And Chinmoy, you have been quite popular on LinkedIn, right? And you have been a big skeptic of blitzscaling also. So can you tell us why do you mistrust blitzscaling?
I don't. I'm not anti-blitzscaling, Tushar, in any way. I think this was a concept, if I'm not wrong, Reid Hoffman is the one who coined it the first time. Reid Hoffman and Ye, I think they coined it the first time. I think just this morning, Tushar, or sometime I was reading about this, and everyone should follow this story about a group called, Ample Hills Creamery. So Ample Hills Creamery it just filed for a Chapter 11, a bankruptcy. It had raised about 20 million in 2-3 years' time. Disney was its biggest investors. You had Oprah, kind of raving about them. They were a Brooklyn-based shop. They were known for, you could say, very whimsical ice cream brands. Right, so they started with a small store, and they were serving almost 2 customers a minute, drawing almost $900 a day. By 2018, their sales had reached about $10.1 million, and they had raised again some 20, 25, 30 million, 20 from Disney and from others. So they just filed for bankruptcy. And the reason that happened, Tushar, is because once they started getting so popular, their focus was more towards how do we market ourselves and how do we keep on running this machine of fundraising. And that is where, so a lot of their own customers, their employees started complaining to them when they were opening centers all over Brooklyn and other places. They I think, took up a huge warehouse to produce, these ice creams. Their early customers and even the staff, they started complaining to them that, the fridge is broken, the ice creams are not staying cold, but their focus had shifted so much to the growth model and growth over profitability and driving this game of fundraising that eventually the entire castle fell through, right? And that's the story that's very, it's in the news just yesterday, I think, Ample Hills Creamery. That's where my problem stems from, Tushar, is that I have no problem with blitzscaling. You, by all means, grow. I want to grow too. I want to scale, but we should be scaling responsibly. Profitability cannot be optional. If we are in the whole mindset that we will hit a certain peak or a tipping point with regards to our customers and then turn on the switch of monetization, it's not going to happen. Because by the time I reach that scale, someone new, someone more nimble would have come over and might be doing whatever I'm doing much better. So that point never appears. When you talk about blitzscaling, Tushar, the first example everybody gives is of Amazon. That, hey, look, they blitzscale, they burnt money, but look where they are now. That's a great story. But the problem is that's the only story everyone quotes. Right? Where are the other examples? There are always outliers. There are always brilliant companies who have defeated all odds. But when we are starting our entrepreneurial journey, you want to minimize your, the strokes which can get you out. When you're starting an innings, you rather look to play straight. So that's where my problem is, that what is the message that we're sending out, Tushar, to all young entrepreneurs who are just starting out? Are we telling them that, look, keep on burning the VC funds but scale, and scale to what point? At certain point of time, Tushar, many of these ventures will come around and say, oh, we are shutting shop because we couldn't monetize it well enough. Now, that's a very, one single nail, a very easy nail to hang your hat on. That's not the thing. You have reached that point because you have ignored the simple, basic fundamental of business is that your cash inflows should be greater than your cash outflows. And that's where my problem stems, Tushar, is that are we sending the right message for the startup ecosystem?
But if not for blitzscaling, right, then how do founders bootstrap their business to success? Mm-hmm. At some point, they would require capital.
Yes. I mean, the opposite of blitzscaling, Tushar, is not necessarily bootstrapping. As I said, it is scaling responsibly. One of the things that we are trying to do, and I'm not saying that we will be successful doing that in the longer run or whatever, but consciously one of the things we're trying to do is that we're saying every property that we take up, we will have to break even at that property within 6 months' time, given our capex and stuff. So at the end of the year, if we are profitable at each and every property level, we will be profitable at a company level. But that doesn't mean that we are slowing down on our growth. We're not compromising one for the other. So scale responsibly. And there are a lot of wonderful VC funds out there, who actually promote this. I'm not saying you put everything under one club, everyone under the one bucket and say everybody is doing that. No, it's not that. There are brilliant funds, there are brilliant angels who actually push this. That I look, while growth is significant, but be profitable as well, scale responsibly. And the second thing about bootstrapping, what comes to my mind, Tushar, and they're, I think, the champions of the startup ecosystem. When I see that they're not being celebrated enough, it kind of hurts you being in the ecosystem. If you take the case of companies like Infosys and HCL Tech, I think they're phenomenal startup stories from India, right? Who have scaled globally. Their soft power that they have given to India is phenomenal. They're brilliant entrepreneurial stories and bootstrapped, right? Currently, if you talk about companies like Zoho, you talk about Mrs. Bector's, the Rajni Bector, going IPO with bootstrap. I think they took on funds very later on from a private equity, right? Brilliant examples of entrepreneurship, but they are not glamorized enough. And those are the kind of ventures, those are the stories that I personally would love to follow. Those, Sridhar Vembu and all that, brilliant guys. So that's my problem with blitzscaling, Tushar, is are we promoting the right people, the right ventures, and not just anytime we want to mask our inability to generate revenues, we are masking it by saying, oh, we are in a blitzscaling mode. And what we all know, Tushar, is that at some point, it becomes a valuation game. And the moment it becomes a valuation game, we are chasing momentum and not fundamentals. It's always about who is the other guy who is going to give me a 5x return and take it from my back. So where are we going with the blitzscaling? That's where my apprehensions with this stem from. I'm certainly not anti-blitzscaling. There are a lot of brilliant companies who have done it very well.
Got it, Chinmoy. All right, we have an exciting last segment coming. It's called the rapid fire round.
Okay.
So Chinmoy, I'm going to shoot a one-liner.
Sure.
And you have to let us know whatever first thought that comes to your mind.
Fine.
Right? Yeah. So let's begin. Pedigree versus passion.
Passion.
Profitability first or growth first?
Profitability.
HooLiv in 2025?
IPO.
Great. One thing you want to change about the startup ecosystem in India?
Reduce the noise. Don't take everything blindly.
One investor you follow?
Dr. Malpani, every day.
And one entrepreneur you idolize?
Sridhar Vembu and Narayan Murthy.
An interesting white space you see Indian entrepreneurs should solve for?
Real estate, there's huge scope. Being in this space, Tushar, I've figured there's a lot of opportunities here.
And what are the top 3 books which you would recommend to entrepreneurs?
Not so much into books, Tushar, but one that I recently read and I resonated, loved that, is the book about the Bhujia barrels. It's a beautiful story about the growth of Haldirams and how women in the family, knowingly or unknowingly, they've always been a part of Haldiram going into the next level. Sometimes because of their own personal tussle, they held back onto some things which turned out to be right in a larger context, or sometimes they've actually pushed their family members to go to the next step. So I think Gujia Barons is beautiful. The other one I love is Miles to Go Before I Sleep. That's a book by Sumedha Mahajan. It's about a lady who ran with Milan Soman from Delhi to Mumbai, and she's a diabetic, a mother, and everybody discouraged her that you can't do this, but she did it, and 30 days they ran. So these two books I recommend, Tushar. And more than that, I'm more into the world affairs, current affairs, economics, politics, so not much into books.
Chinmoy, what does hustle mean for you?
Getting the passion or the belief, Tushar, to get up, wake up every morning and going about it like nothing has happened yesterday.
Great. So before you leave, Chinmoy, what would be one piece of advice which you would give to aspiring entrepreneurs?
Something I said in the very beginning, Tushar, that if you want to make a name for yourself in this space, you have to break a few eggs. And it's not an easy journey. It's a huge leap of faith. And follow the right model. Don't just jump into it for the looking at other people or the noise all around you, but do it for the very right reason. Only when your heart tells you to do that, and be prepared to sacrifice quite a bit.
All right, Chinmoy. On that note, we wrap up our conversation today. I totally enjoyed doing this conversation with you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Tushar, for having me over. And I loved speaking to you too, as always.
Thank you, Chinmoy.
Thank you. Take care.
It's a wrap for today. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. We will be back in the next episode with yet another story. If you have any suggestions for us, please reach out to us at our social handles. Don't forget to tune in to the Hustle Code, presented to you by Team Dexter. At Dexter, we partner with passionate entrepreneurs and help them scale. Until next time, keep hustling.